All right. Hello, everyone. Come on in. I am Dr. Natalie Phillips. I am host of Just Connect, and I have a really special guest today that I can't wait to introduce to you all. But before we get there, I'm just going to go over some housekeeping things. Just don't forget that I do have a YouTube channel. So if you want to catch any of my episodes on YouTube, go ahead and follow Dr. Natalie Phillips. Hit subscribe and hit the notification bell. And then also, it will tell you when I have a new episode that drops. So don't forget to do that. And I will be back with my guest because I know everybody wants to see him as soon as this plays. Okay, so enjoy. I'm Dr. Natalie Phillips, host of Just Connect. I am an audiologist, a business owner, an entrepreneur, and a connector. This life is about connecting for the right reasons and to the right people. I believe making authentic and true connections lead to growth, change, and impacting the world. All right, so I am going to bring my guest in, Lance Allred. Welcome to the show. And he is not there. I think he's frozen. Okay, so I'm going to have him maybe... Oh, hold on. He's coming. So for those of you who don't know him, he's going to pop back on in just a second here. And I spent some cool time with him while I was interviewing him for my podcast. And I actually had a lot of fun just getting to know him and what he's doing. And I can't wait to share him with you. But he's got such a crazy life here that I would love for him to tell you about his story. So he'll be back in just a second here. But I want him to tell you his story. And there he is. Yay. I was telling you, hey, if I freeze, don't move. I'll be back. And then he went ahead and froze. So welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Good to see you again, Natalie. Thanks for having me. Let's do this Facebook Live. Let's improvise.
Yes, I love it. There's things that you just have to learn to roll with it. And that's the part I do love because it is what it is, but I love the true authenticity and how people come on and are able to comment and they get to meet you and they get to ask you questions. Yeah. Sometimes they just kind of hang out. So it is what it is. But welcome to the show.
Yes, good to be here. Let's have some fun.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Lance, I would love for him to just start by sharing a little bit more about your story because your story is really, really cool. So let's start there.
So you want the 5-minute nutshell?
I don't care how long.
Take an hour to get into.
However long. I want all the the details. It's a really cool story. So I don't want to take away any of that. So share with everyone who you are.
Well, the best nutshell of all is as far as deaf polygamous kids making the NBA, I sort of cornered the market. So born and raised in a polygamous commune in rural Montana, and I had RH incompatibility with my mother, and that's why I'm very fortunate to be alive. We're not sure if the nerves in my ears are never fully developed or if they're damaged during the blood changes when my mom took me out of the commune to Hamilton, Montana. And I had several blood changes over about 3 weeks. And about 18 months, I was not responding to things. And my parents finally took me up to an audiologist in Missoula, Montana, where they discovered that I had about 75 to 80% hearing loss. And so there were no amenities to learn sign language in rural Montana at the time. And so I had to be pushed out of my comfort zone and made to wear hearing aids and made to go to speech therapy 3 times a week, twice a week until I was 15, learning to speak this way. And I didn't start playing basketball until my father blew the whistle on child abuse and money laundering for the commune that I was raised in. And we had to go into hiding. All my cousins who had been my best friends were suddenly gone. And as a way to adapt and cope, I grew that year from 5'10" to 6'4", my 8th grade year. And the coach saw me walking down the hall. He's like, "Hey, you should come play basketball." Like, "Yeah, sure. Whatever, let's give it a shot. It's a good way to make friends and belong. And I don't have to really worry about communicating, right?" Little did I know that team sports requires extreme amounts of communication. And my first game, I was ejected because the ref thought I was ignoring him. I couldn't play basketball with my hearing aids in, so I had to learn to play in a very different way. And keeping my head on a swivel, being more peripheral vision oriented, playing basketball with a soft focus, so being more intuitive and instinctual rather than relying on eyesight to take care of everything. And obviously I didn't have the hearing to help me with what I couldn't hear coming my way as far as screens and other issues. And I did not make the NBA until I was 27 years old, 7 years longer than the average player, playing all over the world, being told I couldn't do it, but I kept at it and made the NBA with the Cleveland Cavaliers when I was 27, and 10 years of professional basketball. And then I retired in 2015 to be with my son. I didn't want to be away from him as I was going through a divorce. And so I've now been speaking, corporate coaching, writing books now for the last 5 years.
Awesome. So let's talk about, for people who aren't audiologists that are tuning in, because they see you and you speak really well and you've got earbuds in. So let's talk about that. Like, how are you able to, I'm sure you use some lip reading, but
Yes.
how are you able to use your earbuds right now? Do you have hearing aids that go deep into the ear, or?
Yeah. I have the, well, one of the earbuds isn't working, so I just wear it anyway, so it doesn't drag. But I wear these tiny inner ear hearing aids that go in the canal, and then I can put the earbuds over it and hear what's going on. I like the inner ear because it keeps the sound in front of me. A lot of people wear the behind the ear like I did when I was a kid back in the days of analog, and I don't like hearing all that noise behind me. It's too much. And so I like keeping everything in front of me. And so learning to read lips, I had to learn how to read first. I learned to read and write, and then I would watch people read. And then I'd figure out, okay, patterns and rhythms in the A-E-I-O-U. I hear vowels. I don't hear the consonants, taking the vowel shifts in the context of a conversation. And you just recognize patterns. Living in between the signing world and the speaking hearing world, I live in a very small world where we learn to just watch people, and you recognize patterns of how people communicate, especially from the geographical region they're from, what sort of questions they ask. And the third question, you probably ask how tall am I, right? So you just learn to figure out, and you count the syllables. And every now and then I'll miss a question and I'll respond completely out of left field with an answer they weren't expecting. But we keep it fresh like that, those with hearing loss.
Yeah. And I love how you're talking about taking in everything, because it talks really about your life and, having the hearing loss, having, being able to play basketball, and relying on probably some of the patterns that you had to, for your peripheral vision, some of the soft skills that you've said people take for granted. Somebody calling out a screen for you. I don't know how many times you've been flattened on the ground, by not seeing that screen. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that, even with the hearing loss, even with you playing basketball, that has led you into just this enlightenment, or should I say, I've been reading your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having it. Thank you for reading it.
And, but it's pretty interesting how you speak about basketball. And I know that you had told me, because we spent some time together, and you had told me that never underestimate the strength of using a sports metaphor or just a sports reference,
Yes.
And I was looking through some of your media packet and how you're a TEDx speaker with over 4 million downloads on your TEDx talk. You wrote a book about how to be a TEDx speaker. You've got speaking engagements and people testimonials from Coca-Cola, from Costco, from Coldwell Banker, from the FBI. I was like, oh my gosh. So, looking at where you've been able to speak, and I know that you've even spoken at some automotive conferences. I think I've seen that in the last year.
Yeah, Marsh companies have me in Detroit last fall.
So It's
Great
so
people.
interesting. And I anybody that wants to look at what he talks about, some of his topics, visit his website here. But it's interesting because these are such a vast array of audiences. Although your topics can probably, be tweaked to whoever you need to talk to, because they're about things like leadership and sales and business and, perseverance and things like that. But how is it that you're able to be a speaker to many different audiences, or are they really that different? And I'm probably assuming you use a lot of sports references, because in the time that, I've known you and we've spent some time talking, it makes it a lot easier to understand the way that you explain things because you use it in kind of a sports reference. So how do you
Yeah.
as a speaker, are able to get out there to all these different environments and these different organizations to be able to speak and make that much of an impact to so many people?
Great question. Wow. Excellent question. Again, yes, never underestimate the power of a sports metaphor, but also never underestimate the power of a question. Asking people questions forces them to go inward. Instead of me telling them how it is, and every now and then you have to do that and come out and hit them with a hammer, but mostly getting people to go inward, because truly, I don't care if it's sales, leadership, sports, whatnot. Emotional intelligence, emotional quotient is far more important than IQ. In the basketball world, in the team sports, no one cares if you're the smartest guy in the room. And so many people in our stat-driven era of the internet and numbers, they think they can quantify the human heart. They think they can quantify people. And I stress with people all the time when I'm coaching corporations, if you're throwing stats at your employees, I guarantee you all they're hearing is, I can quantify you.
Mm.
And that doesn't inspire people. People want to know, have you been in the trenches where I'm at? Have you been through what I'm going through? Do you actually care? Or am I just a number to you? The coaches who always beat us over the head with stats, it's a fear-driven model that says your humanity, your emotional intelligence means nothing. I see only stats. Whereas the great players, and we're watching Phil Jackson right now in The Last Dance, he was a beautiful facilitator in allowing everyone's emotional intelligence to have room in a collective agreement, that everyone was seen as a human being. That yes, Jordan was taking most of the scoring, but when you have a facilitator that allows people to be seen and recognized as humans, you're going to get more than just the bottom line. When you're driving people through stats and all you do is you keep looking at the numbers, that fear-based model is only going to create bare minimum results. The coaches that I played for, let's see, very few had the humility to ever apologize and also pull me over to the side of a game and say, Lance, what are you seeing out there that I cannot see from my perspective? And I would tell him. Now, whether or not he followed my advice or not did not matter. Just the fact that he was willing to listen to what I had to say and willing to hear my input. And knowing that he saw me as a human allowed me to say, okay, I trust Coach has all the information and he's going to make the best decision with what he's got. And that allows me to stay in my place and know my role and control what I can control. And so all these experiences, yes, sports metaphors, but growing up in a polygamous commune in an authoritarian society where people were treated like objects, where that, you know what, we're a socialist commune and everyone should be treated equally, but really we're not, because there's a hierarchy. And seeing the inconsistencies of that type of model and being able to take this wide array of life experiences that far transcend basketball, from my upbringing to the hearing loss. And I was a writer before I became a basketball player. I was a kid. My parents encouraged me to read and write. I was a kid in elementary school that won writing awards before it was cool. And so I was always I was a writer who happened to play basketball. And that's how I saw the basketball world, just through a different lens, and my hearing forced me to. And so being able to take all these experiences And yes, give the sports metaphors and little sports nuggets to the people that just care about sports, but learning to pepper it with emotional intelligence nuggets, with reflection, with leadership nuggets from the coaches I play for, but also my own experiences of being a team captain all around the world because of my ability to read body language, helping people understand that while we love stats, basketball players, stats inform us, but they do not drive us. And the whole world is freaking out right now in the quarantine because we're like, wait, I thought we had all the stats. I thought we had everything under control. But the basketball player knows we can have a scouting report and we can have statistics, but at the end of the day, the other team going to come out with new plays. The refs are going to start calling the game differently in the third quarter than they were the second quarter.
Right.
And we can throw fits and pout about it and say that's unfair. Or we say, okay, I have to adapt and I have to flow. And so being able to really hit home with all of these CEO types that love to go to sporting events that are missing the message of what the athlete is teaching them. When the CEO says, oh yeah, KD, way to make the great instinctive play. The play was broken. You broke from it. You made the home run. Good job, man. But then they go to work the next day and they hamstring their employees and say, what did the stats say? Failing to learn the lesson that stats inform us, but they do not drive us. That the great athletes, when they're in the zone, they're not playing from their head. They're in their body. They're in their heart. Masculine and feminine. Passing the ball is feminine. Shooting the ball is masculine. And so that is us being in our body. When we're in the zone, we're not in our head. We're not thinking about our shots. We're not aiming our shots. We're not trying to control anything. We're just dancing with life. And so being able to take these sports metaphors and my experiences and my ability to communicate that I had to work hard for allows me to really have a little extra cachet when I'm talking to people about communication and how to read the body and how to actually connect with people authentically, heart to heart. And that is what has allowed me to cover a wide array of hosts, as you named through.
And so if somebody were interested in having you come speak at their organization, do you spend some time learning a little bit more about, you know, what's going on at the organization and what their needs are?
Always. I figure out what their pain points are. I talk to them about that. I said, oh, well, I got a story for that. I got an experience for that. I got an action point for that. Being able to take a lot of experiences from my teams where I was, again, the team captain, that allowed for better team bonding activities, I guess, being able to transition those outside of the basketball world and to help people just be bold enough to communicate authentically, to communicate clearly. Now, we live in a society, whether it's people stuck in the soulmate narrative or CEOs throwing temper tantrums because people aren't reading their minds. Both narratives are what they're really saying is, I don't want to have to communicate. That my soulmate is out there. They should just read my mind and know all my pain. If I'm having a bad day and being emotionally abusive to them, they don't like it, then they just don't get me. And the CEO is saying, well, people should just know my vision. They should know what I want. They should read my moods. If not, I'm going to fire people and throw a temper tantrum. Both of them are the child archetype throwing a temper tantrum because they don't want to have to communicate and be an adult and be vulnerable and put themselves out there and be willing to have a real authentic communication.
Yeah. And I think that's totally key. And what's interesting too, is I'm going to kind of roll into courage and grit, because that's what we spent time talking about for my podcast that you were gracious enough to share with me. But let's kind of stop and go into courage and grit, because what I think is really cool is you talked about the CEOs, you know, you talked about the relationships, right? Maybe even coaches to players. But what Courage and Grit does, your nonprofit that you started, starts with kids, you know, and starting them young. So let's talk a little bit about Courage and Grit, and let's tell people about that as well.
Thank you. Courage and Grit is more than just another nonprofit where we throw a ball at kids and say, hey, play some ball. It's, yes, under the guise of basketball that I go around the country and wherever I speak at, whatever city I'm in, that corporation or that university that has me there, I also make the effort to reach out and connect with a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA, something to that effect, or a deaf community, where I'm then able to go and do some little mini basketball camp with the kids and work with them. But while I'm doing that, I'm scouting kids to bring into a larger curriculum where, yes, we're going to coach them with basketball and the arts and other sports, all sorts of things. And they get this world-class coaching when they turn around and help us coach special needs kids. So they're learning that service is leadership, that they're learning that service is abundance. People keep thinking money and toys and possessions is abundance. No, abundance implies limitless. And so that's service, that you can pick up a shovel at any point and help someone dig a trench. You can help someone cross the street, and that is limitless. That is abundance. And so changing that narrative to help these kids that are from at-risk areas, that also maybe have hearing loss, but especially targeting Native American communities and kids with hearing loss, but also the at-risk, whether it's rural or inner city, and getting these kids that are coming from pretty tough situations. And I'm not necessarily looking for the 4.0 students. I'm looking for the outliers, the kids that have had enough trauma or life experience that has forced them to see the world in a different way, that they see things outside the box, that they are willing to ask questions and push the envelope, that have the entrepreneurial edge. So those are the kids that I'm looking for. There were kids like I was growing up, asking questions that infuriated my teachers. And but I had a great 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Ogden, one day when she was really frustrated. She held me at the school one day and she said, "Lance, I'm beginning to see that with your hearing loss, your brain has had to learn to see the world in a different way. And people are going to call you arrogant, stubborn, incorrigible, and promise me you will never change or bow to them. Keep your beat at who you are." And that took 10 seconds of her time to say that to me, but it was a lasting impact. And pretty fun story you read in the book. I got to share that story about Mrs. Ogden at Central Utah at an administrators conference, and Mrs. Ogden was in the crowd.
Oh, wow. Did you know that?
No, I did not. And in that moment, she was the wealthiest woman in the world.
Oh.
Because she knew that all the years she had invested as a teacher and administrator, it meant something, that it wasn't for naught. And so knowing that your time and your effort and your presence here on earth is not in vain, that's abundance.
Yeah.
And so helping these kids have that mindset of service, and service is leadership through the Courage and Grit model. That's very much my passion. Positioning to have a hub of opportunity, transitioning a school in Oregon coast that's now empty, a high school that has all these resources, that I could have these summits and kids come to summer camps.
Oh, wow.
But kids in the area, in a distressed area, Goonies never say die. Being able to let these kids also have that as a resource, and I coach them and I work with them. And so that is the vision of Courage and Grit, that yes, while I do travel, I use it to help as many kids as I can while I'm there, but also keeping an eye out on a select few that I know just need a little break to go their way. That if someone just gives them 10 seconds extra more, like Mrs. Ogden gave to me, they'll be able to do amazing things.
Yeah. So it's service, it's time, but it's also communication. Because if Mrs. Ogden didn't say anything, you would, in those 10 seconds. And that's the thing that, you look back and you think, oh my gosh, that teacher made such a difference. But it doesn't have to be a teacher. It could just be, a colleague, a friend, an adult that might be talking to you. So this abundance that you speak of, you and I spent some time talking about it because it's important. It's not wealth and it's not money, but it's the time, the service, and like what you stand for too is this art of this communication, of being able to stand up and say what you think in that moment, because you never know whether you're going to have that chance again. And then also you never know, like Mrs. Ogden probably had no idea that she touched you in those 10 seconds that, shaped a part of your life anyway, which is incredible. with courage and grit, this is something that I've learned from Lance, spending time with him. But for those of you who are interested, when he books a speaking gig in that particular town or that organization that comes in, part of the thing that he does, which is really special, is he does reach out to, like what he said, the Boys and Girls Clubs, to things that are already organized. It's not something that you have to organize something together, but maybe that organization that's hiring him to come out and speak is able to work with a Boys and Girls Club in that area, so that not only are you serving your employees or your staff with bringing him in as a keynote speaker, but your organization can also be part of this really neat camp that, again, it's very selective.
Yeah.
And so there's not 300 kids that are there. It's smaller. It's more intimate, like 20 to 30-ish kids. And yes, he hides behind the basketball, thing where he can teach some lessons, I guess, through the sports. But then in addition, those select kids, those 20 to 30 kids, then turn around and then they are able to, in that same time period, bring in other special needs kids that they can now teach. So it's an immediate type of thing where that's what his camps do. So I just wanted to make sure it was clear for people that when you hire, Lance as a keynote speaker for this organization, that it comes with this as well. It's something that he definitely wants to do. And that's what he's doing with Courage and Grit, which is so smart and something that should be very simple to do if there's another organization that wants to partner with wherever he's talking.
Yeah, I have a team of people that consult for my nonprofit. They take care of all the logistics. Mm-hmm. Basically, if you're the company and you're hiring me to come in and give the keynote, we're going to make you look really good. That you don't have to lift a finger, that my people are already going to organize the community outreach stuff. And then you as a company get the plaque, you get the signed picture and everything and recognition for enabling this event to happen with the youth in your community.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So I wanted to make sure people that are listening, people that think, oh my gosh, I might want him to come out to speak at my organization, think about that as well, because it's like a twofer, really. It's something that, you do get to inspire your own organization, but in addition, you're giving back to the community, which is huge. Yeah, yes. which is really huge. Okay, so I want you to talk a little bit more. I know that, were you a poet before?
Poet? Yes, I do have poet archetype in me. I won some poetry awards in school, and I have a book of poetry called the Pesaro Poems that I wrote in 2009 when I was going through suicidal depression in Italy. And so, yeah, poetry has always been dear to my heart.
Well, at being a writer first, like you said, a writer who then played basketball, Lance has got a lot of different books out there. Talk to me about some of the books before the new Alpha Male. So for those of you who are out there, this is his new book that was released in March, was it?
Yeah, just last month with Sounds True and Macmillan Publishers.
Okay. So before we get to the new Alpha Male, because it's really interesting, you had...
Let's go through them. Long Shot. Long Shot, The Adventures of a Deaf Fundamentalist Mormon Kid. That was my memoirs published by HarperCollins in 2009. That was my first book. I gave them 800 pages. I had already been writing my memoirs for catharsis throughout the first couple of years of professional ball before I was finally joining the Cleveland Cavaliers. And when HarperCollins heard my story about making the NBA and being the first legally deaf player in the NBA history, they wanted to send a ghostwriter out to get my story. I said, I already have, it's 800 pages. And they axed it down to 250. But it's a fun book, and it's very Hollywood sports film-esque. And I wrote it to be that way, that you start with my experiences growing up in polygamy and then all my adventures around the world and finally ending with the NBA call-up and how it happened. And then the second book, that I actually published, but I wrote third because I started writing the Pesaro poems second, because later the next season with the Cavaliers, the economy hit in 2008, and I was released, and a lot of teams released their 14th and 15th roster spots. And I went over to Italy, and I wasn't getting paid. The team didn't have money, and my reality with my expectations, and I still, even though we had broken away from polygamy, I had an internal narrative, a story that God had made me deaf as a form of punishment. I had it impressed upon me by some figures in my childhood that was the narrative. So even though I knew polygamy wasn't true, when you're a kid, you're absorbing all this information. And I was driven by the story that said I didn't deserve love. And so fear was very much one of my main driving factors. And that's what I do a lot of work with people and corporations and companies, is attacking their stories and helping most people see that their culture is their biggest blind spot, and their stories and their fears come from the cultural narrative that is programmed in our brain like a software system when we're born in this world. And helping people really check their stories. And when they can detach from their stories, they can detach, especially from the story that their worth is attached to an outcome. And when you're not afraid of failing, but with accountability, you know, wow, I can actually go out and play ball, and I can make mistakes, and I can learn from them. And those are the hardest people to guard, the players that aren't afraid of making mistakes. Tangent, I know, going back. The Pesaro poems I began writing in Italy after I nearly jumped out of a window. And that was just me using poetry to process what really, looking back, was a nervous breakdown, or a breakdown of the nervous system and a breakdown of the hardwiring, the programming of my cultural system that was in my brain. Then I started writing Basketball Gods, which is the second memoir, a sequel to Long Shot, which is very much Empire Strikes Back. That Long Shot was a happy ending, but the movies and the books never show what happens after the happy ending. The life goes on. And so Basketball Gods, the transformation of the enlightened jock, is very much, I'm still in memoirs, but it's me very clearly moving into a different path that is where I'm on now. It was a huge pivotal point in my life, and me deciding, where do I actually want to go with my life? And do I want to go on the journey of emotional health and accountability? And I know the notion of EQ or emotional health is abstract for some people, but I tell them it's simple: accountability. Do you take ownership not only for what you project into the world, your agreements, your debts, and all of your commitments, but are you accountable for the stories you tell to yourself and to the world? It was 10 years, Natalie. I chose that path 10 years ago, and took me 10 years of a daily discipline before I decided to write The New Alpha Male, and we'll get to that. And so the fourth book was How to Give the Million View TEDx Talk. After I did What Is Your Polygamy? I retired from basketball. I was going through the pain of a divorce, and I didn't know how to grieve from the community I grew up in. So I had to learn as a 34, 35-year-old man how to grieve, and how to understand that feeling emotions doesn't make me weak, but my suppression of emotions that most men are taught is where my pain was coming from, and why so many men are committing suicide and we don't talk about it because we think it's weak. But learning how to express that and go through that refiner's fire of grieving was very much solidified in What Is Your Polygamy, my TEDx talk. That, again, I love metaphors, and people think it's just going to be Lance talking about polygamy, but just helping people understand metaphor, and how we're going to use this metaphor to go deeper and deeper and peel off the layers and the onions of our cultural conditioning and our stories, and how we all have it. And so after that went viral, I figured, hey, it's a good opportunity to, right now, as I'm going into the speaking circuit, not everybody wants to read a memoir or a book of poetry. So I need to quickly make some sort of nonfiction book that is a teaching guide or whatnot that can complement my keynotes when people come to buy my books after. I don't sell from the stage, but I like having books there that when people come after to visit with me, they have resources to choose from. Speaking is very sacred to me. Learning to speak, the ability to speak, is one of the things I'm most grateful for. And so it's just like the basketball arena was, when you're in the zone and you're channeling and you're just with life and dancing with it. The same thing happens to me when I'm on stage and I'm speaking. And my keynotes were formed as I was speaking. It wasn't that I sat down and wrote them out beforehand, that I knew to trust the zone or the field, what you would call it, and learn how to intuit and read what people's body languages in the crowd are responding to and give them more of what they needed that I could intuit. And so what is your polygamy is me helping people, if they want to learn how to give a TEDx talk, understanding there are open calls. Some of them are open call venues. Some of them are select committees. Some of them are open curation. TEDx Salt Lake was open curation, and I loved them so much because I went to them with 10,000 words, and they kept making me go back like the scene in The River Runs Through It when his father keeps writing it out and say again, half as long, and learning that brevity is wit and the power of a question. It's only 1,300 words. But the impacts of questions and how much it gets your mind going. And so being able to help people understand that we all have the story. I know there's a narrative out there that everyone has their truth, and I push back. We all have a story. We all have our narrative. While the event did happen, how we choose to tell it is our story. But helping people understand that we can either be victims of the experiences that happen to us, or we can be teachers. Those are the opposite. That's the shadows, the shadow and the light, the victim and the teacher. And helping people begin to learn. I've worked with several people on their keynotes and TEDx talks now. How can they take their experiences and make them generalizable for other people? Because we have so many people thinking that public speaking is all about being the smartest guy in the room. It's not. People don't care how much you know. Again, like I told you earlier, half hour ago, they want to know if you care. People remember what they feel, not what they hear. And so a lot of people lose their opportunities on TEDx stages by trying to be the smart guy and talking over everyone's head. And realizing, no, it's about the art of bringing the head and the heart together. Head, heart, and soul. Those are what I said, the combinations of great TEDx talks. And one of the first examples I saw was Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability. Head, she has some data. Heart, she has some humor. She has some presence on the stage. Soul, she showed vulnerability. That's the trifecta that I tell everyone. If you want to be an effective public speaker, head, heart, and soul, you have to have all three. And that's what I coach people on. And so that is book number 4. That was something I slapped out in 2 months. Just wanting to get something. It's not my greatest work of art, but it's something of a teaching guidebook for people. But then the new alpha male with Sounds True Publishers. And I like Sounds True because I do have a spiritual side. That is the path of the red man that I've always loved, Chief Joseph. And Sounds True navigates in the area of that kind of spirituality without being totally laissez-faire and angels and fairy dust. That they're a grounded spiritual resource. And so I reached out to them with an idea and about how to use the sports metaphor to help men begin to walk a more heart-centered path. And a team of predominantly women chose the title The New Alpha Male. I didn't really choose it. Because these women, I love them. This is why I love them. They said, because we want you to activate and trigger women too. We want you to bring up the word alpha and make people uncomfortable. Because when they're uncomfortable, that's when they're ready to learn something new. And you bring up cultural conditions and stories of what it means to be an alpha. And being able to tackle the old outdated Cold War era model that said the man with the most trophies, nuclear weapons, the most wives in my community is the most alpha. And that's an old story that's dead, that's dying as we become a global society. And that's why we see so many men who are scared, but they don't feel they can say it because they're also are being held to a standard that, be a tough guy. You can't show any vulnerability. But a lot of men in the American way are being left behind and they're scared to say it. And what's happening is we're not getting a lot of compassion sent back to them. Instead of shaming, saying, well, now you know what it feels like to be marginalized.
Right.
That's never going to inspire people to change. ever is only going, shame only makes people go deeper into the
Mhm.
bunker.
Mhm.
But the problem, here, it's not the problem. Here is a beautiful clarity that those who have been most wronged in life, they have the greatest charge or the greatest task of being able to be the ones that demand accountability, but stopping just short of an eye for an eye,
Mhm.
which is where grace is found,
Mhm.
which is where room is given for people to maneuver. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mandela, they were not reactionary. Reaction has never brought about systemic change. Response and compassion is what's brought about systemic change. And being able to help both sides, men and women, have a clear lens and say, oh gosh, this is what's really stopping it. It's the culture, the Western American culture that we think still is real, but it's dying. And we have a choice to drown with it,
Mhm.
or we have a choice, as a basketball player does, when the refs start calling the game differently, to say, okay, I can get a technical and get ejected, or I can adapt and
Yep.
find a way to win this game. And so the new alpha male is me taking all of my experiences and my 7 principles of perseverance, that is my main keynote that is most commonly requested,
Mhm.
and making them generalizable and teaching points through sports metaphors, through relationship experiences, to help both sides come together with more open, authentic communication. That really is the summary of the book. All about communicating, helping both sides, both genders, all genders communicate more
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah, and you do it really well too. It's been really interesting to start to read it, and then I am definitely passing it on to my son too. So it's just one of those things, Again, if those of you who haven't gotten it yet, I want to make sure it's in the frame, but make sure that you get the new Alpha Male, because it is interesting, and that's one of the things that Lance had told me too, is that it's not just for men either. So I'm glad that you clarified that too, because
Yeah.
and I'm reading it too, and it's really interesting, and I like what you do there as far as how you actually wrote it. And I'm not going to spoil it for people, but I definitely think that it's something that's worth getting. So, how do people find you? Now, I know that you've done some, and I know that you've kind of walked a little bit into it with the spirituality. I've seen some of your retreats that you do. How do people get a hold of you, whether they want you to come speak at an event? I know that you've got some people they can, I guess, visit your
Mhm.
website. And I know you've got somebody that can book things for you. But what about retreats? What about some other things that you do that may be a little bit different as well?
Yeah, the retreats and the coaching, those are all on my website
Mhm.
too. And with the quarantine, yeah, some of the retreats have been slowed down, but I'm in the process of finally purchasing a hot springs resort in Montana that I can be a steward of, that I no longer have to do this fine balance, that I can actually make it more open and transparent as a spiritual place where I'm just a bridge. It's not about Lance or how much Lance knows. It's just me being a bridge to help people get to the land of Montana. And I tell people the directions have energy. Then you go north for clarity and for ancestors. You go east for new beginnings. You go south for abundance or manifesting. And you go west for endings of stories.
Mhm.
And so many people are trying to sell retreats to Bali or Costa Rica. And I'm
Sure.
like, they're going one direction. There's medicine in all of the directions. And whenever I get a chance for a vacation, I always go north. I love the north. And so being able to let people see there's different medicine there. And in the process of them going into the hot springs, which is very sacred, it's a representative of Mother Earth's womb. There's a lot of death and rebirth of stories that no longer serve you, and you getting a metamorphosis and being able to go out into the world with more clarity. And that's what I tell people, challenging the definition of happiness. That in our society, we've been conditioned that happiness is the wedding, the MBA call up, the contract, the new Lexus. That's just satisfaction. That's a moment of
Mhm.
satisfaction. And those are fleeting. Yet we keep thinking they're happiness, so we keep chasing it because we want that dopamine release that comes
Mhm.
with it, when that's just a drug, and we're addicts for satisfaction. And happiness to me is clarity. clarity of knowing that I don't have to play that game, that my worth is attached to what car I'm driving, or if I'm still in the MBA, that as a self-actualized human being walking the path of the heart, being able to feel all the emotions that life throws at me and being able to feel it because I can. Because that's what makes me human. Mm-hmm. And in that awareness and in that knowledge of being human, you then have the clarity of saying, wow, I am so much more than just my stories. I'm so much more than just this simple moment on planet Earth. There's so much going on that we are so stuck with blinders on as a human race that we have, in hubris with all of our stats and data, begun to think that we're the greatest intelligence out there. And we need actual evidence to convince us that there might be a more intelligent being than us. And that's the definition of hubris. And we're ripe for a Greek tragedy. And being able to step outside of that and say, wow, with humility, I can now begin to see my place in the greater whole. And with that clarity, you're playing on a different game board now. And you're no longer doing the rat race. You're no longer living in fear that all my events, my speaking events have been wiped out for 2020. And I could be old Lance and freak out and worry about my mortgage and my car and my status. Or I can say, okay, this is a beautiful time for the world to pause. And we've all been waiting for the world. We've been asking for the world to stop for just a minute. And we finally got it. And now we don't know what to do with it. And I'm going to take advantage of this and actually use this time to go inward, journey inward, and develop a deeper connection with Source or Mother Earth and just my own existence of who I am. And that, so all that being said, that's where my journey, my metamorphosis is right now. And me choosing to do that, the funding and the agreement for the hot springs finally came into place.
Wow.
In the quarantine.
Wow.
That instead of me throwing a temper tantrum and resisting what is, it was, I am going to walk my talk and I'm going to adapt and I'm going to flow. And it all finally came together. And so in the fall, I'm looking forward to organizing my retreats up at the hot springs in Montana. And you can learn more about that. I'll be announcing it on social media, on my website, but Lance Allred 41 across the board, whether it's social media, or the website and whatnot, or individual coaching. And for speaking, yeah, you reach out to me anywhere. I work with several different bureaus, but it's not a problem if you reach out to my website directly as well. And that lets my team get ready to work on the community outreach stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just see you and I see like well, I was going to say a big circle, but I see like all these small circles, but it's basically coming around again. And it all started from, and you said that in your book too, just that first story of you being told that you were deaf because God was punishing you, and it goes back to the stories that we tell ourselves. It goes back to, yes, exactly like what you said, the event happens, but how do we take that event and how do we tell that story to ourselves, whether it was when it happened to us as a kid or whether something happens to us as an adult, as we, yes. I think people get stuck in those, I'm replaying this over and over and over in my mind, and yeah, that's kind of like a spiral. It's not really a circle, but the way that you are shaping what you're doing with your speaking engagements, with, bringing other people into this clarity as well, with your coaching, whatever it is, even through your speaking and how, even as you're speaking, it's like closing a circle because you start, but like you said, you feed off of people in the audience and you really don't have your keynote until kind of the end because you're able to see it and know how to pivot. It's just like the basketball, court, right? It's your soft skills that you had to develop because you were deaf and you didn't have hearing. And so you had to rely on a lot of different things that other people don't rely on. And so I love that your life just comes full circle around into what started as a kid, where you are right now, however tall you are, however, old you are, however, new things that you're going to start, whether it's a book, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it is your retreats, your coaching, everything just seems to all be in a circle where you just want this to kind of keep going and to bring people into that so that they experience that as well. So I absolutely
thank you for seeing that. That's a beautiful way to sum it. And as you're talking about that, I never saw it that way, but you're talking about about the flower of life, the way you're talking about all these circles coming together and bam. And that's very much the way it is. And that speaking has never been the arrival for me. I don't do public speaking to be this major, massive celebrity influencer and have 10 million followers and be a cartoon character, almost a persona that's run away from me. There's no, speaking is just an ends, a means to an ends that is like the gasoline that I can keep putting into a car that allows all these other endeavors to start gaining their own momentum. The vision is, yes, they will all eventually become self-sustaining, but right now speaking has very much been the gas hose to get all these cylinders firing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And so it's been such a great opportunity in this downtime to be able to get to know you more through my podcast, also through this. I really appreciate your time. I love what you're doing. You've definitely got a fan for life. Whatever you need, I will always push out for you. I'm glad that certain people got to join, and it's gonna live on here. People that missed it, catch the replay or go to YouTube, but also reach out to Lance. It's something that he's very approachable, and like you've seen, just wants to help people, and because he's experienced everything that he's experienced, no matter what it is, whether, we have this connection because yes, I'm an audiologist and you've got a hearing loss, but then also we're entrepreneurs, and there's so much more, authors, TEDx, things like that. But it's not just me. It's everybody that he has the ability to touch and to just get his story out to. You'll find out how relatable it is to your life. And I love speaking in metaphors. I love seeing the picture of things. It's just so exciting when things kind of click when you're talking about something. And that's why I think I love the sports metaphors. Every time you bring one up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally see what you're talking about.
Yes.
But it's not just sports metaphors. It's everything else that you're doing. And watching your life and getting to see all these very cool opportunities. You're definitely here. I'm glad that you did not do anything in Italy. You're definitely here for a purpose. I'm very glad to know you and to be able to introduce you to my audience and people who might want to reach out to you for whatever they need.
Thank you, Natalie. And each conversation you've had, you have been brilliant with your questions. So thank you.
Oh, thanks.
I haven't been bored. But secondly, just from my heart to you, and I know Craig Casper, I didn't get to say this to him when he interviewed me, but it's because of people like you as audiologists that gave a kid like me a fighting chance. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. From our audiology community, we love what we do. And so, people like you touch our heart all the time. So thank you so much. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. Catch the replay, share this out. Get Lance out there because he is doing some amazing stuff. And I'm so thankful that he got to join us today. So thank you guys very much. And I will be back next week, Monday. I'm going to cover more things about The Last Dance, I think, because it was such a hit. So I'm back talking about lessons that I've learned from The Last Dance from some of the last episodes. We're going to keep on this basketball theme because it's something that I love. So, all right. Thank you, Lance. Thanks so much for being here. And I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you, Natalie. Be well, everyone.